Good morning, everyone. Good morning. You know, Angel did a really great talk. It was so informative, very deep, made you think. This one I hopefully will make you laugh. We'll have a good time with this. You know, we've all heard about hobos throughout our time. We've seen them on TV, and we've seen caricatures of them. And there's been comedians, and actually, when you look at the Shrine of Clowns, a lot of the Shrine of Clowns will dress up as the hobos, you know, Freddy the Freeloaders and stuff like that, you know, either the happy ones or the sad ones. But when I was thinking about this one day, there was a Shrine of Clown approached me and said, you know, could you give a talk for our lodge? That was Jenks Lodge. And there were a lot of Shrine of Clowns in there. And I said, gee, what are we going to talk about? And then all of a sudden the topic came up, gee, they dress the way they dress in their clown outfits. I said, let's do something with the hobo. And little did I know that this was going to be an interesting one for me to learn as well as I went through it of what is a hobo. Now, it's interesting how they are thinking. If you look at that front cover, that front slide, that's what we normally think of a hobo, don't we? Yeah, kind of a downtrodden person sitting there, homeless, you know, just as we used to call them, the vagabonds, going all over the place and stuff. But life on the Iron Trail, and the Iron Trail was the railroad, which was probably the most important aspect of the life of a hobo. What is a hobo? As you see there, a hobo is a migratory worker, a homeless, vagabond, or penniless. That's what we think, isn't it? The term originated in the western or northwestern United States. And we wondered, where did hobo come from? And there's a lot of different stories. I think the one that's most accepted was that during the time of this, or the largest time of hobos, a lot of them were migrant workers. And being migrant workers, a lot of them had a hoe because it was agricultural. And they would carry their hoe with their bag of clothes and their belongings on the hoe. And they were called hoe boys. And then it got shortened over time to get the hobos. That is one. There were several of them, but that's the one that seems to be the most adopted and makes the most sense of where that would come from, because no matter how you break this term up, there's no way for it to become real. So just in the grammatical sense of phonetics, it does seem to make sense. Now over here, tramps work only when they're forced to, and bums don't work at all. And I remember my grandmother used to say that. She used to say to me, "I feel you me." Yeah, she was Italian. Believe it or not, she was Italian, you know? And she would say to me, "You go to work every day, and I don't care if you make 1 penny. You have 1 penny more than the day you had yesterday." She said, "If not, you're a bum." And when I was doing this, I always remember her saying that. And I look at the first one that says penniless. And I'm looking like, you know, that was true. But hobos, that wasn't what their life was about. Their life was totally different than we could ever imagine when we see these pictures of them. Right? There were various titles for hobos. Look at them all. Some of them were not that nice, but if we just look at them and just read them down a little bit, hobo, tramp, bum, beggar, vagabond, go through all of them, gypsy, drifters, swagmen, sundowners. Sundowners, that's a good one, huh? Ramblers. Name of a car, too. I don't think the car was a hobo. But, you know, idler, straggler, and there was some beach bum, beach combers. Now, you know, in the 60s and 70s, beach combers and beach bums were really surfers. But, yeah, how did that become part of the hobo definitions and talks? Footloose, hikers, lowlife, panhandlers. You know, panhandlers today, we have a lot of problem with that. And, I mean, there are even some cities that want to have ordinances against panhandlers. But they really weren't panhandlers. Right? Next. Yeah. Right. Hit them down. Hobo Beginnings. It was interesting where this all started. And right after the Civil War, they had to get home. They had no way to get home. They were out in the fields. They had their rifles, Half of them didn't have much of their clothes on their back. They had to get home. The only way to get home, since they didn't have horses, was by the rail. And they would jump the rails. And they would go from town to try and get back home. Well, since they didn't have any money, because let's face it, they really weren't paid when they were in the military then, they didn't have the money, so they had to work their way around. Hobo population. This is a really good one. Look at that. In 1906, now notice this is the 1900s. We're talking from the Civil War all the way to the 1900s now. In 1906, they estimated 500,000. Then it goes up to 700,000. And during the Great Depression, 14 million. So when we look at that population and the amount of people that were out of work and using the rails, jumping the rails, that was a lot. So was it really an individual bum that just went around and didn't want to be part of life or didn't want to be part of society? Not at all. It was the total opposite. These were people who began as a hobo to defend, to fight, put their lives on the line, and afterwards were destitute. And the only way they got away around was that iron trail. Now, it wasn't an easy life, as we see here. There were certain dangers involved. Of course, you had to endure the natural elements. You had snow, you had rain, you had wind, tornadoes, you name it, hurricanes. They were outside. That's where they lived. The hostility from the train crews and the staffs. They were nicknamed bulls, and they would beat these hobos. Matter of fact, there was a movie I just watched recently on TCM where there was these two hobos in one of the railroad cars, and they purposely set the car on fire to burn them to death. That's what they thought about hobos. They thought they were just the freeloaders, and they didn't want them around. But I'm going to read you something afterwards about the code of ethics, and one of the things that they say, but keep that one point in mind. The terms. They had their own language. Look at this. They had all their own terms, and some of them are really great. I love when you read down there. Now notice, beachcomber, when I said it earlier, how did they get it? And if you look down there on the third one, hobo was a hobo around the docks. So where would the railway go? The trains would go to the boats, or pick up from the boats, and they would rail it off. So they were at the docks. They weren't just in the forests or on the plains or in the cities. But I love bone polisher. A mean dog is a bone polisher. I mean, we really think of how creative some of these terms were. Of course, personally for me, priest, I like that one. Sky pilot. Very inventive. But you could see the culture here, and I'm not going to read them down because it's just not worth it, but you get a few minutes as I'm talking, just read them and look at what it meant to them and what things were important, because these names and these terms that they used were very important in their lives. I love that Yahoo, which is a chocolate drink. There's really no excuse for ignorance. Think of that, no excuse for ignorance. So were they unintelligent when you really read some of these things and what they looked at and what they termed and what they felt were important in their lives? Kangaroo court, I think we all heard that. How many have remembered kangaroo court? When you were in school, you used to do that little diagram and hang the person. Kangaroo court, but we got something from the hobos, didn't we? Beachcombers were from the hobos. Easy mark, we always used that. That was very big in the 20s and 30s. You were an easy mark, whether it would be for gambling or a con job or something like that. So how did this became part of American culture as well? And remember, hobos are only in America. This is an American thing. No other place in the world are there hobos. And here's their symbols. Now, these are really curious. The symbols were, not only did they have their terms, but the symbols were a very important way for them to get around, to live, to protect themselves. It was really, if we look at them, and I love some of these here. If you look down, I wish I had my little pointer, but I don't today. if you go in the first chart there, all the way over to where the first break is, the middle break, and come down. Oh, you got one? Oh, the little green arrow. Oh. Okay, right there. Wealthy. I love that. The triangle being a person with the top hat. Because remember, hats were really important back then. If you had a derby, you were one class. You had a top hat, you were another. You had a stovetop pipe, you were important. That was the wealthiest person at the stovetop, and he always carried a cane. So when they mocked that, that's what they would mock for melting. Well, there, look at this, unsafe place. How similar is unsafe place to jail? But I think jail is a little safer than the unsafe place. But, you know, these were all mockings that they put out. Tramps are here. Now, notice they didn't like tramps. Tramps were lazy people. You don't socialize with tramps and bums. Oh, no, 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 no. You just don't do that. You're a hobo. You are respectable. Very respectable. And come over on here. Don't go this way. But you have two of these, get out fast. So I guess if you make a mistake, you might end up having the wrong symbol and doing the wrong thing. But it's really crazy. Just take a look at them for a minute. Officer. Now, when I saw officer, that's almost a papal sign. The sign of the Pope. How did the sign of the Pope become a police officer? Who knows how they devised these or why? I love this, man with the gun. Some of these we can relate to, but some of them you look at and say, like, sleep in the barn. I love that one, sleep in the barn. How do you get that out of that? You know, here is the place. How do you know what you're looking for? Here is the place for what? But they had some really important ones about talk religion for food. Right? I mean, there were some really important ones over here. Kind woman, right? Work available. And you start going through all these. Look at telephone, even if you had a call. A doctor, if you were in pain. A poor man. One of them that, that I thought, I love this one here. Bad dog. Bad dog. It looks like he's caged, right? 4 little legs, and he's caged. When you know what it is, it makes sense. But if you were walking around somewhere and you saw that, unless you were a hobo, you had no idea what these markings meant. Boy, almost kind of like some of our Freemasonry and our symbolism that we need, that we use. There's all sorts of symbols of all historic times from all the mystic societies are meant to tell you something. And this is a perfect example of symbolism working not only in the esoteric for you to determine or extrapolate some great value out of it. These were things you had to live with that protected you. I mean, beautiful. I love this one here, stop. I wonder if we ever use that for our stop sign, if we would know it. Like, what would stop mean? And yeah, and I really don't judge. Looks like he's confused. I don't know, but I mean, dishonest man. Like, how does that mean this? It looks like a banana with a plus sign. I don't know. But really, they were just great symbols. And yet, I love this one. Beware 4 dogs. How many times you find 4 dogs? I don't know. But it was great. And, you know, I found even more charts that had different symbolisms on them because you couldn't put them all out there. But the importance of their language, both in their terminology that you saw before and you're seeing on the slides now, is how they got around all the way across the United States. Because not all of them were just there for work. A lot of them wanted to, in the earlier time, go to the frontier. They wanted the frontier for the promise of a new life. Some made it. Some never did. Don't forget, when they were going on that railway, not only did they have to worry about the bulls from the railway, but they had Indians as well when they were traveling. There were other dangers there, and they even had people when you went into towns who didn't want them. And it would be foolish for us to think that, even back in them days, that they just weren't shot by the ranchers or by people who thought they were just freeloaders and they were worthless. It was not an easy existence, but it was an existence that they absolutely loved. hobo living. This starts where really we talk about the culture of hobo. If you notice the hobo jungle, the hobo jungle was any place that they gathered. And they would gather for the night, and they would share everything. They would share stories. They would share things such as, don't take this railroad, or don't take this particular one there, or watch out for this bull on this one. They communicated to themselves for protection and to get around. But the jungle was a sacred place for them. When they got together there were rules that they followed. And they had their own society, their own culture. And they had their meals. You notice that? I love this term, the crumb boss. Isn't that cool? And mulligatawny stew. Now, the crumb boss, that, again, another interesting term that they put together. What did they have to eat a lot of times? But crumbs, bread, small things, no lavish meals. But one of the meals that they absolutely loved and was the mainstay was the mulligatawny stew. Now, anybody here ever hear of mulligatawny stew? Probably not, right? Mulligatawny stew in the culinary world is a very important stew. It was a stew that was really developed in India. And when the British were there, the British Raj were there, when they controlled India, they actually took that soup and brought it to Britain. And what it was celery, carrots, onions, a broth, and would be curry spice in it, and then anything else that you could put in it. It could be chicken, it could be pork, it could be like whatever, but just don't kill the sacred cow, you know, in India. So when they went, they adopted this term, but theirs was a little different. Their mulligatawny stew, I think they used the term just because it was a cute term. It just rolls off nice mulligatawny. It sounds more Scottish than what it does English or anything else. But their stew had two main ingredients. They didn't have the celery, carrots, and onions and the chili and the curry powder, no. Theirs was mostly beans and noodles and anything else they could find. Could be potatoes, rutabagas, turnips, anything that they could carry. And why? When you're on the trail, think about that. You can't have anything perishable. You had to carry the simple ingredients. And when you think, well, even though they didn't understand nutrition, beans, high in protein and starch, and the noodles would fill you up. And when everybody would gather together, this crumb boss would cook it. And everybody would bring something and throw it in the pot. I mean, well, I can imagine what some of that might have been like. You know, a little bit of possum, a little bit of this, who knows, right? But the good part was that every meal was free. Don't forget, they didn't have money. They shared every bit of their lives together. Imagine that. Totally free. And again, coming around the campfire we talked about a second ago, camaraderie, you know, what trains to take, where to go, what destinations. But I love this one. This one here is over here. They love to brag. Oh, they love to brag where they were. The bosses that they beat in the bulls, and oh yeah, you know, I was chased and I got out of this and I got out of that and I ran over here and hid. And they had wonderful stories of where they went in all these different towns and cities. They didn't need maps. They had the stories. Next. Modern hobos. Yes, hobos still exist today. It's still a culture. If you see over here in Britt, Iowa, right there, there's a town of 2,000 people. Look how many years they've been having the Hobo Convention. 112 years. I think it's 13 or 14 now from when I originally wrote this, but, you know, think of that. They have their annual convention. You would never think of that. And it's always in that town from where it originated. That convention is really important to them. And if you look down here, I love this. There's only 3 bars in that whole town for 2,000 people. And there's actually a hobo museum that you can go in and see the history of the hobos. The hobos were very talented people. You'll see that towards the end of this on some of them. They had crafts. Some were good woodworkers. Some were painters. They were great artists. a lot of them, and some of our folk songs came from the hobos. They would sit there and strum their guitars. There was a whole culture here. But look at this. This is who was allowed in the convention. First, you had the actual travels, the hobos, and they will allow some of the tramps. You know, in their convention, they had to brag and show everybody what they were. Then they had retired hobos. Imagine that. Retired. I wonder if they get a Social Security check on it. They were retired. There's a person that had the rails for years and then finally decided, I had enough. But they were still a hobo. It's like Freemasonry, right? Once you're a Mason, you can't undo a Mason. You're a Mason, you might drift away for a while, become unaffiliated for a while, but are you always a Mason? Yeah. And when you come back, you would still be considered a Mason. So the same there. Just because you took a little hiatus doesn't mean you weren't a good hobo. Hobo enthusiast. People are hobos at heart. People that would love to do it, but don't have the guts. Well, the tenacious to go out there and live a life out in the elements. And they also had part-time hobos. Hey, I'm going to take off for a couple of months. I don't like my boss. You know, I think I'm going to take off. The hell with him. I'm going to get a new job when I get back. Or maybe I just want to go to another destination. Maybe I want to live in another part of the United States. And I really don't have a car or anything else. But you can still jump the rails. Of course, today it's a little more difficult jumping the rails because of security. Ever since 9/11, their life has become very difficult to get around. Oh, can I go back? I think sure. I'm sorry. I missed that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They also had membership cards. And notice they had their own union. International Itinerant Migratory Workers Union of America. Think they had their own cards, their own, like, union cards. They considered themselves workers. They were migratory and itinerant, just like we had itinerant district deputies who just go around the state. They don't have any one particular district that they're attached to. That's what they were there. They were not attached to any one particular thing except to themselves. So they had their own union. And they had their own rules with their own union. And I'm going to read afterwards, which I took because I wasn't going to memorize them. But, oh, part one's the wrong one. Is they had a list of their code of ethics. And I'll read a few of those afterwards, which are really interesting when you read the code of ethics, what their mindset was. It was just absolutely brilliant. And they also had memorial ceremonies. And the memorial ceremonies that they had is if a hobo died and they were at the convention, they would hold memorial services. And for their memorial services, they take a piece of burlap and they would rip it. And they'd tie the burlap on their arm as a signification of their poor lost hobo. And burlap was something that they used a lot for clothing. They kept burlap bags. And as a matter of fact, at one point in time in American history, burlap bags were so important to make clothes when people were so poor that the manufacturers of these burlap bags actually made them softer so people could use them a second time as clothing during the Depression. None of us really knew that they would really do something like that. Imagine wearing burlap, how uncomfortable that would be, but that's all you have. And just absolutely incredible. But they had royalty. Their convention, they had a hobo king and queen. And the king and queen got a chance to sleep in the little house. Now, they weren't married, the king and queen, so they weren't in the same room, but they slept in the same house. And they voted on them. And there was actually a float, as you would see in here, after the election. Now, it's interesting, I put this up here. There's a little house where they would stay. And here's the king and the queen for this particular year. And when they elected a king and a queen, there was campaigning involved. But even for this couple here, they elected them from the heart. It was really interesting, the stories behind these two. The queen was a little lady that would go around to all the dumpsters and try and pick out cans and try and find food and lived the life the best she could. They wanted to honor her because she was probably the most downtrodden that they had within their group. And the king, he was dying of cancer. And they decided that this would be his last time ever for him to be able to be a king and to be honored for all his years as a hobo. Boy, isn't that a nice way of thinking about it? Benevolence, the thought, how they cared for each other. And they really did care. Yeah, that was Minneapolis Jim in terminal cancer. They even had weddings. Yep, you could get a hobo wedding. Yep, you might have the tent and maybe some mulligatawny stew. I'm quite sure you didn't have a chicken dinner or a prime rib. But I really love the one thing that they had is their vows. Excuse me, let me go back to this. Instead of holding flowers, the bride and groom would hold a stick of rhubarb. They'd throw the leaves of the rhubarb in the fire because the leaves are the bitter part of the rhubarb. It symbolizes letting go of bad things. Listen to that. Letting go of bad things. Not what we would consider, I know when I first read it, it'd be, the bitterness of life. Right? Isn't that what you would think? But no, it's the letting go of bad things. And they had their own vows. And this is great. You are the way you are, and it's okay for you to be that way. May my love for you always be greater than my need for you. You can find that on a Hallmark card. You really can. That is a spiritual writing on that. You know, if you need somebody, is it love? No. Needing is not love. Needing is a self-fulfillment of something that you want. Love is unconditional. That's a brilliant statement. Absolutely brilliant. That's a little bit of the priest sneaking in there. All right? May I always do what is right, even if it is not what I want. Wow. I always say to people, to do the wrong thing is easy, to do the right thing is hard. And that's just what they're stating there. Do the right thing even if it isn't what I want. Might be helping somebody that you don't particularly like. I'm quite sure there were hobos that they weren't too happy about that might have had attitudes and they didn't want to do anything, but it was right. And you do it as part of it. And to help you be a success in your way. So even in a wedding, we take that context. Isn't that almost like the perfect way for a husband and wife to act? It truly is. That's how we should interact between each other. But not only that, in life, that's how we should act between all of ourselves. Famous hobos. Utah Phillips. Now, he was a train hopper, and his most famous song, I love this one here, is the Moose Turd Pie. He was quite a character, and he had many songs that he did. And he was famous when it comes on the railway. Utah was like the pinnacle. He traveled everywhere. He knew almost everything. He was quite a personality. And the other one is this one right here, Steam Train Maury. He was probably the most famous, and if you ever see his artwork, it was incredible. This man was so talented. In that Hobo Museum, they have a lot of his artwork there. And here we go. Anybody remember these people? Right? The most famous hobos of all, Charlie Chaplin. And where was he all the time with Charlie Chaplin with his train and jumping over things and doing things? Very famous. Red Skelton, one of our own brothers. Now, Red Skelton was a 33rd degree Mason, and he was a Shriner clown. And the thing he had in all his life that he did is he painted pictures of clowns. And there is in a museum a lot of his pictures. He was an incredible artist, not only a comedian, but incredible artist. And he personified with Freddie the Freeloader the idea that benevolent, that happy, and sometimes sad type of hobo who lived his life and he laughed it away. Emmett Kelly, also known as Weary Willie. If you ever have anybody that likes to collect clowns, there's a whole Emmett Kelly collection of clowns, of clown statues. Another really important person. And Coco the Clown, one that was, I guess, more defined in the late 40s and 50s was Coco the Clown, but another one that was a huge personality. And somehow, and you don't know how, that there are certain names that come up in our political, in our cultural life in America. And we do that sometimes even with actors. There might be an actor who isn't extremely famous, but their name is a household name, and you wonder why. And yet there are others, like I can never remember his name. He's the guy on the insurance commercial. State Farm. Yeah, who is that actor? Most people won't know his name, yet everybody recognizes him. He's been on more shows and TV sitcoms. It's amazing, yet you recognize him and don't know his name. Yet there'll be other actors that you know their name and why. They did 1 or 2 movies and became famous as a household name. But I'm going to read you right now some of the hobo ethics. And these are really cool. This is a lesson for all of us, to be honest with you. I love this. Decide your own life. Do not let another person run or rule you. When in town, always respect the local law and officials. Try to be a gentleman at all times. Don't take advantage of someone who is in a vulnerable state, locals or other hobos. Always try to find work, even if temporary. Now, this is a good part of this one. And always seek out jobs that nobody wants. By doing so, not only do you help a business along, but you ensure employment should you return to that town again. Now, that's pretty cool. That is pretty smart. When no employment is available, make your own work by using your added talents at crafts, as you saw, singing, the artwork, and the stuff like that. And they made a lot of things. They were very handy, and they would sell them. Do not allow yourself to become a stupid drunk and set a bad example for locals' treatment of other hobos. Right? Don't be a drunk because they're going to treat other hobos terrible when they come into town. When jungling in town, respect handouts. Do not wear them out. Another hobo will be coming along who will need them as bad as you, if not worse than you. So if someone gives you something, just don't go back to the same place all the time and ask for more and more and more. Just take what they gave you and move on. Of course, their jungle is where they all met. In the cities, on the bridges, mostly in the woods is where they met. And that's why I'm coming to this next one, explaining it. Always respect nature. Do not leave garbage where you are jungling. When they left, they took everything with them. First of all, nobody would know where they met, and they would come back to the same spot again. If in a community jungle, always pitch in and help. This is another good one here. To stay clean, or always stay clean, and boil up whenever possible. What they meant by boiling up is 2 things. They would boil water so they could take a bath, but also their clothes. They would boil their clothes in order to clean them. They didn't have soaps. So the best way to sterilize or clean your clothes is to boil them up and beat them on a rock and clean them out. Hang them up and dry, and there you go. When traveling, ride your train respectfully. Take no personal chances. Cause no problems with the operating crew or host railway. Act like an extra crew member. Do not cause problems in the train yard. Another hobo will be coming along who will need passage. Do not allow other hobos to molest children. Expose all molesters to authorities. They are the worst garbage to infest any society. Whoa. Think of that. We're talking like the 1860s and above that some of these things were adopted. That is a pretty heavy one. Another one that I really love about them, and I put it towards the end, was help all runaway children and try to induce them to return home. Help your fellow hobo whenever and wherever needed. You may need the help someday. Do unto others, which others do unto you. If present at a hobo court and you have testimony to give, yeah, they held their own court with the judges, whether for or against the accused, your voice counts. Did we ever think that a hobo, his culture, his life, his ethics would be as deep as this? How they lived together, how they worked together, how they protected each other, how they fed each other, how they memorialized each other, they wed each other. Absolutely incredible. And that's the one on that first picture that we saw of what we think a hobo is. I hope on this little presentation that would give you a different view of the American Railway and what these people did, because a lot of them are the hobos that did make it to the frontier did become prosperous. Not all of them stayed on the rail. A lot of them did make the rail, make their way out, carved out their life, and lived a prosperous life. And just think, to attribute your prosperous life to being a hobo on the Iron Trail. Thank you. Thank you.